Hello everyone, this is Untitled and we are back again, and here now we have another fun video for you, and here we will be talking about comic book movies and what I deem are the top 10 best acting castings within a superhero movie genre. Which were the 10 best examples of a casting which perfectly reflected the comic book character. Now, when we look at the criteria for this list, the most obvious one, of course, is that the actor looks like the comic book character involved in terms of their look, their physicality, how close are they aesthetically to the original character, and I think that is overall very important to the success of the movie. Now, the second level of criteria on this list is how much do they embody the character in terms of their personality. Do they portray the nature of the character in terms of their demeanor? Do they successfully convey the personality traits so synonymous within the character? Now, the third level of criteria that I'll use on this list is, does the casting actually enhance the original comic book character in terms of their relevance, in terms of their legacy? Did the casting make the character much more known and much more revered on a cultural basis due to the performance of the actor within the role? That's very important as well. So in this list, obviously, I will be concentrating only on cinematic movies, not television movies, and I will stick to one individual character per casting. So I hope you enjoy this breakdown, and if you have any choices regarding this breakdown that you feel I've missed, or do you think there are certain characters that I feel I should have included within this breakdown, then let me know in the comments below and I will discuss further, and indeed make another individual video if I do agree with what you have suggested and I feel this character should have been also included within the breakdown. So here we go then with the top 10 listings on who I believe were the best ever comic book castings within the superhero movie genre. So the first entry at number 10, and we have Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. The Australian actor first portrayed certainly the most famous member of the X-Men way back in Bryan Singer's film from early 2000s, and perhaps he didn't convey the best look in the first movie, but subsequent movies after that, his physical conditioning improved massively, where he had much more of that muscular, ripped tone that we so much associate with the character. Now, to be honest, I almost didn't have Hugh Jackman on this list, and it's primarily because Wolverine, as we all know, originally is 5'5", and Hugh Jackman, of course, towers at huge 6'2", so there's a major disparity there. And also the fact that he doesn't wear Wolverine's iconic costumes, where it would be the brown and yellow or the yellow and blue, so iconic in terms of the look of the character. And perhaps this is again down to the fact that Hugh Jackman was just too tall and maybe the suit wouldn't fit him. But in terms of the personality, Hugh Jackman definitely conveys enough that rage and anger and torment. He certainly has had multiple movies to portray this character. Of course, we have the original Bryan Singer first two films along with Brett Ratner's The Last Stand, and then he was successful enough to have two solo movies on its own, both in Wolverine X-Men Origins and later on with the Wolverine back in 2013 as well. So for many people, the most iconic and certainly the most defined personality within Wolverine in terms of live action is Hugh Jackman right now. So that's why overall I've managed to convey him on this list, even though it's at number 10. Some people may have him higher, but I just think the size, dynamics, perhaps knocks him down a bit in terms of this overall casting. But no doubt about it, a fine entry on this list at number 10 with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. We go on to number 9 on this list, and that is Helen Slater as Supergirl. The American actress made her live-action debut in the role of Kara Zor-El in a 1984 film, which I think we can all agree was a disaster for the most part, but we also can't deny how great Helen looks as Supergirl. The costume itself is a perfect visualization of Kara's look. It's bright, colourful, perfect tones with the red, yellow and blue, all of those classic Superman-esque looks and aesthetic that we so much identify with. And along with her bright blonde hair as well, she perfectly reflects the sweet nature of Kara, and as well the personality. If you watch the film overall, she has that very sweet, charming, endearing, almost very naive character trait about her, and it makes her very much of a rootable character throughout the film. She really is the only primarily reason for that you keep watching the movie throughout. She too had a great feminine physique about her. She was very tall, athletic, yet still had lots of curves and tones, and of course she's far more preferable than what we are currently seeing in the upcoming Supergirl version in the 2022 Flash movie so far. So without doubt the best looking version of Supergirl, Kara Zor-El. I think it's the best live action representation in terms of a visual aesthetic overall, very much down to Helen Slater, and she had a very much of a sweet character that we would associate much more in that upbeat, more positive personality that we identify with Kara Zor-El as Supergirl. So a fine choice with Helen Slater as Supergirl at number 9. We then go on to number 8 on this list, and that is J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. Now, J.K. Simmons today is very much one of the most respected actors within all of the industry, and in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films from the early 2000s, he perfectly encapsulated one of the most iconic supporting characters within all of the Spider-Man verse. And J.K. Simmons' J. Jonah Jameson is a fantastic example of not only looking like the character, but also being like the character in terms of its personality. Simmons perfectly nailed the loud, brash, fast-talking nature of J. Jonah Jameson. We all love those scenes in the first couple of films with Peter Parker going to the Daily Bugle when Jameson meets him for the first time. So fantastic, so great and iconic when he laughs. It's used so many times in so many internet memes that we see across. Fantastic overall, and J.K. Simmons was so great in this role that the Marvel Cinematic Universe fully recognised how favoured he is, and they brought him back in the end credit scene in Spider-Man Far From Home, fully appreciating how iconic an interpretation that J.K. Simmons is as J. Jonah Jameson. So overall, a great choice at number 8 on this list. A very fine example of looking like the character but also embodying the personality as well. So there we have a great choice at number 8, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. We then go on to number 7 on this list, and that is Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow. Still one of the most prolific and hottest actresses of today, Scarlett Johansson very much projected herself to mega superstardom by taking on the role of secret spy agent Natasha Romanoff, who, to be honest, prior to the MCU was very much of a C-list, perhaps a D-list character within comic book fandom. She was very much more known by the hardcore fans of the comic books, and she had a slight recognition in terms of the Iron Man animated series, but primarily she was the antagonist of Iron Man before working her way to joining the Avengers with her brown hair, very permed-like style, in her black, sleek, tight costume. She was very much the sexy femme fatale, and of course Scarlett Johansson embodies that sexual look and confidence that we identify so much with the character now, and her casting really is included on this list as one of those examples which has enhanced the presence of the character within mainstream culture. If Wonder Woman is the most cultural female superhero today, then Black Widow without doubt is number 2, and a lot of that is down to Scarlett Johansson, the way that she portrayed the character, as I mentioned before, so confident in her abilities that we completely understand and believe that she can hold her own and earn her place within the superpowered being within the Avengers, and she has earned her place within our cultural identity so much that she's managed to make a big budget solo movie, Black Widow, which is due for release very shortly next month on July 2021, and she really portrayed so much that sexy, physically competent, skilled embodiment of a female superhero, and I think that's great to see throughout, and that's truly because of the superb casting and performance of Scarlett Johansson within the role as Black Widow. So a great choice at number 7 on this list. We then go on to number 6 on this entry, and that is Patrick Stewart as Professor X. The revered, established actor had already reached cultural iconic status in his role as Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek The Next Generation, and to be honest, his casting as Charles Xavier seemed very much like a no-brainer, and for many fans in the pre-internet era, I can remember very much so many campaigning for Patrick Stewart to be cast within the role as Charles Xavier, the assembler of the X-Men of course. And when we look at Xavier, he really should be a man of status, gravitas, life experience, wisdom and authority. And who better to showcase all of these elements than Patrick Stewart, of course, who very much of course brings all of those elements all the way through the Bryan Singer films and the Brett Ratner films, There was a change of tack in the character within the Logan film directed by James Mangold, but I think of that more of an Elseworld take on Xavier. I think primarily the more established, iconic identity of Charles Xavier is very much in those Bryan Singer movies, and Patrick Stewart does an amazing job overall, completely convincing us of Xavier. Of course, he had that primary look as well, which convinced so many fans that he would be a great performance in the casting, and overall he proved to be as well. So a fine choice here amongst the best movie castings within the comic book genre. That is Patrick Stewart as Professor X at number 6. We then go on to number 5 and a hugely significant entry on this breakdown, and that is Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. A very important entry on this list as we are looking at the very inception of the MCU with, of course, the first Iron Man movie back in 2008. And many, of course, when we look back, felt that the casting of Robert Downey Jr. was very much of a risk because of his well-known personal issues prior to this movie, and the fact that Iron Man itself wasn't as great a known a character as what we would see certainly within Spider-Man, X-Men and the Incredible Hulk. But Robert Downey Jr.'s interpretation of Tony Stark was every bit as instrumental in how the Marvel movies are and the cinematic universe and its success overall is viewed today. Robert Downey Jr., through his own charisma as an actor, perfected the narcissism and the egotistical nature of Tony Stark, and for a long time made him the most culturally popular comic book character within all of movies. Iron Man in the beginning was very much of a second, third tier character in terms of Marvel behind Spider-Man and X-Men, but through Robert Downey Jr.'s performance he ended up superseding those properties for a short while with his own individual movies, making just as much if not even more money at the box office as those previous characters. And that was very much down to Robert Downey Jr. in terms of looking at the character. Not too hard really, he has the typical black hair and the typical stylish of the moustache and the beard, so not too much of a stretch to convince us in terms of looking at the character, but it was the personality that Robert Downey Jr. brought to the role that captivated audiences very much, enhancing the legacy of the character and of course providing that huge invigoration and renaissance in Robert Downey Jr.'s own career overall. But it's really his own individuality and his own charisma which makes him such a special and very much of an essential character in terms of a comic book casting. As I mentioned before, it's really not too much of a stretch to say that if Robert Downey Jr. hadn't been as successful in his interpretation of Iron Man, then the Marvel Cinematic Universe wouldn't have been the massive juggernaut entity that it is today. So that's why it's such a hugely crucial and significant casting overall. A great performance, a great interpretation by Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man / Tony Stark on this list, a hugely significant casting and one of the best ever comic book movie castings of all time at number 5. We then go on to number 4 on this list, and that is Jack Nicholson as the Joker. The legendary actor portrayed Batman's most iconic villain in Tim Burton's cultural blockbuster from 1989 to electrifying effect. Yes, there have been many good interpretations more recently after this movie, but for me it's Jack Nicholson's portrayal that still reigns supreme. We all know that the Joker is a very scarily intense, menacing and unpredictable and threatening villain overall, and Nicholson hits all of those notes perfectly, but he's also very funny in a darkly comic fashion, a humour that we hadn't seen in the latter versions of the Joker. And Jack Nicholson still had a heightened level of insanity and craziness that has performed much better, I feel, in his performance than what we saw later on in the versions after this, which really painted a much more darker, one-note portrayal of the Joker, much more of as an agent of chaos or later on very much of a mentally ill individual. But Jack Nicholson's portrayal had far more energy and charisma and made the movie infinitely more entertaining because of his presence. So many quotable scenes, so many iconic lines that he presented throughout his performance overall. Where does he get those wonderful toys? Wait till they get a load of me. Just truly impressionable and iconic. The fact that he was much more of an elderly or aged character also gave credence to his overall experience and his tactics and his strategies that he used throughout as well. So that's why I also feel that bolsters his standing as to the best live action portrayal of the character. For me, still definitely the best live action representation of the character, also bolstered that in Jack Nicholson, of course, one of the greatest actors of all time. So that's why for me, his portrayal is the best performance of the Joker, and that's why I have him high on this list at number 4 within this breakdown. We then go on to number 3 on this list, and that is Wesley Snipes as Blade. The action superstar came across his most iconic role in the incredible Blade movie from 1998. Still today one of the most electrifying comic book movies ever. His role here as the vampire hunter again is one of the best examples of enhancing the original character in terms of the status and legacy, really bringing a modernisation and live action sensibility to the role, fusing those elements of science and martial arts along with the more horror elements that we associate with the character, once again turning a largely unknown character into a mainstream property. Wesley Snipes fully brought his physical capabilities to the role, looking even better aesthetically than the original character did. He looks fantastic in action, in the brilliant action sequences and fight scenes overall. Snipes' casting was so important, as Blade was really instrumental in bringing back the renaissance within the comic book genre following the disaster that was Batman and Robin. Would we have seen later on the X-Men movies or the Spider-Man movies without Snipes casting as Blade? I'm not so sure, but such a brilliant movie and such a brilliant casting choice, and that's why I view it so highly on this list at number 3. An exceptional casting in terms of a comic book in Wesley Snipes as Blade as number 3 on this list. We then go on to number 2 on this breakdown, and a truly exceptional choice for runner-up, and that is Michelle Pfeiffer's iconic performance as Catwoman in Tim Burton's stunning Batman Returns sequel. We talk so much about improving on the source material, and this is one of the greatest examples ever. Originally a cat burglar and really just a standard love interest for Batman, Michelle Pfeiffer's interpretation is infinitely more interesting and creative, starting off as lonely secretary Selina Kyle before transforming into Catwoman, a fully immersive character, a schizophrenic, lethal femme fatale with clear sexual tendencies. Michelle Pfeiffer lights up the screen to electrifying to effect, to such a point where her version has been seen as the true benchmark of the character for a whole generation of comic book viewers and also mainstream movie goers as well. Catwoman is sexy, dangerous, intimidating, and truly a compelling character with so much more in terms of her depth and layer, in terms of her personality. This is by some clear distance the best interpretation of the character, and also Michelle Pfeiffer's most famous role and iconic role within all of her screen career, so a great runner-up, a truly great example of enhancing and improving on the original source character, and in terms of movie book castings, one of the greatest ever of all time. So we come to it at last then, the final choice, the number 1 position, the best, greatest ever movie casting within all of comic book movies, and I think if we're being truly honest with ourselves, there really is only one choice. As a fan of movies or comic books, you cannot really dispute this selection within this list, and it is of course Christopher Reeve as Superman, making his first appearance as the greatest superhero in Richard Donner's 1978 classic and leaving an impact and legacy that has yet to be matched overall, and perhaps it never truly will be. It is simply casting perfection. Christopher Reeve himself is 6'3", just like the character. He has that black hair and physical stature, just like the character. His facial angular looks, his blue eyes. He literally is a de facto archetypal movie book casting interpretation of the character. So much so that he has literally been ripped from the comic books and been put on the big screen. His costume itself still remains the best version of the character, so much so in its bright reds, its bright blues. It looks so vibrant, it's full of life and colour and action and excitement. Of course, what makes the casting truly perfection is the overall performance of Christopher Reeve, a true genius in terms of his acting ability. So incredibly, he was able to evoke and elicit all of those special attributes that we should see in a Superman character: the nobility, the earnestness, the compassion, the integrity, the way that he had so much of this easy approachableness. You really felt that despite all of his powers, he was someone that you could talk to, that you could come and approach, relay all of your issues and problems to. And Christopher Reeve got all of those elements so spot on throughout his performance. What was really so indicative about his interpretation of the character is that he could make you convinced that he was Superman both in and out of the costume, and this is typified no more so than in the scene within the first movie where after flying around the city with Lois as Superman, he comes back into her apartment as Clark Kent. She goes away for a short while in his original form, and then he takes off his glasses, he stands up straight and smiles, and that's where we can really see the Superman persona within the character without needing to put on a suit. And I think it's something that no other actor or actress has been able to portray throughout all of comic book movie history, the ability to fully portray the character without necessarily putting on a suit. It's just a magical casting, a truly genius casting. We also credit, of course, the directors and for giving Reeve the huge material in really creating two distinct different personalities in both Clark Kent and Superman overall. So despite the fact that he just wore his glasses, you could still believe that people wouldn't be able to figure out who he is, and it's just a tribute and a testament to how amazing and iconic Christopher Reeve was in the role. And for me, 40 years overall, you still just simply revere the character and the actor as well. Yes, there have been multiple interpretations since Christopher Reeve, all with varying amounts of success to be fair, but as to this current day, none of them come truly close to leaving the same cultural impact and lastability, and anyone who tries to argue against that simply hasn't seen the Reeve films overall. Simply put, Christopher Reeve is still the greatest ever comic book movie casting, looking exactly like what the character should like, embodying the heroic nature and personality traits of what we should see within Superman, and also leaving a legacy and cultural reference that goes simply unmatched today and still remains as strong as ever. And that's why I deem overall Christopher Reeve as the greatest ever comic book movie casting of all time. So those are my overall picks and choices when I break down the top 10 most greatest ever comic book movie castings of all time. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As I mentioned at the start of the video, if there are any choices that you feel I've missed and deserved an entry on this list, let me know in the comments below. And if I deem those significant entries, I will make a supplementary video to this one as well, paying tribute to the choices that you feel should have been included in this breakdown as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and let me know if you'd like me to continue doing breakdowns within this comic book genre. If you have any other lists that you feel warrant further discussion and debate, let me know in the comments below and I'll provide a breakdown as well to your liking. Please also hit those like and subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality breakdowns and content like this in the future. But that's it for now on my top 10 picks on the greatest ever comic book movie castings of all time. That's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.